Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 253 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Lieberman, and today we're talking about how consulting demand really gets created, because it's not how most of us think it gets created. And it's so important to know the answer to this question, which honestly took me a really long time to figure out. So I want to make sure it's not the same situation for you, so you can avoid that same mistake. So that's what we're up to here today. Last week, we talked about what predictable pipelines look like and the pillars behind them. And so this week, we're expanding upon that, really drilling into how do business owners originate demand instead of waiting for it, whether you're fully utilized right now or in a slow period, or maybe you have no clients on your current consulting roster. Wherever situation you're in right now, this is really important, and I want to help you with this demand creation so that we can set you up for a strong quarter and a strong year for that matter. So let's talk about the agenda for today, and then we'll dive into the details. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what is opportunistic demand versus owner-led demand. And then we're going to drill into what I call the owner-led demand engine, so that you can really understand how demand is created and what the components of creating that demand is, so that you're not so reactive in your business, as many of us are as consultants, especially solo consultants. Then I'll give you a very specific example so you'll understand how to bring this to life in your own business. We'll talk about the misconceptions. That's the other side of this coin, and equally as important, so you know what creating demand isn't. And then finally, we'll talk about why this matters for your business. And I'll wrap up the episode with helping you with the exact steps to put the episode into action. So that's our overall agenda. At a high level, the point here is that we want to help you stop hoping for work and start creating work. I'll say it again, it's important. Through this episode, we want to help you stop hoping for work and start creating work for yourself in your business. All right. So the way to do that is going to be through this demand generation episode. Before we do, though, one other thing I want to encourage you to download. If you haven't done this, download the Fill Your Pipeline with Ideal Consulting Clients in 26 minutes per day. This is an incredibly useful and one of my most popular downloads, because it gives you a standard operating procedure for filling your pipeline with consultants. If you're fully utilized, you do one of these 26 minutes a day. If you're not fully utilized, you might do 2 or 3 rounds of this standard operating procedure that I'm sharing with you. And you can download it at rammethod.com, RAM method.com. And excited to have you put that into action. It gives you a very specific routine you can put into place. Okay, now that we are through the agenda and I gave you a free resource, let's talk about this idea of opportunistic versus owner-led demand. This all maps back to, how does demand get created? Created is the key word here, right? Not waited for, created. So a lot of us are in this path of relying on opportunistic demand. This is where work arrives somehow, you react, and you figure out how to fit it in. Work might arrive through word of mouth or through your warm network or through a past client. And you are so excited. Something came into your inbox or to a text or to a LinkedIn message or wherever it comes to you. And you react and you figure out, and for the most part, you talk yourself into it. I know that's what I used to do. Someone would reach out to me and say, hey, Melisa, can you help me with X, Y, or Z? And I would always figure out a way to justify why that made sense. But the model here is that you are waiting for work to arrive. Now, let me be clear. You may be doing things. Many of us are, right? We're doing things that feel like we're generating leads, that feel like we're doing our best with respect to business development, but it still doesn't feel in your control. And it isn't in your control. You're doing a lot of things and you're hoping, and it's not a owner-led demand generation. It's not a demand generation process where you actually do have control. And that's what we want to work on for you here today in this episode. Because the opposite of opportunistic based demand is what I call owner-led demand. And that is where you're intentionally creating executive conversations. You're intentionally creating conversations and moving them through a pathway. You are intentionally creating conversations even when you're fully utilized. And you are shaping the work that follows. You're not waiting and figuring out how to fit in whatever is coming to you or justifying whatever's coming to you. That's the difference. And so as we think about that difference of opportunistic based demand and owner-led demand, I'll tell you for sure, figuring this out, and I didn't have those words to use for it at the time, and this was many years ago. I'm almost at 14 years in my business, so this was probably 10 years ago that this happened for me. But looking back now with the words I can use for what happened, this is the shift that unlocked my consulting business growth. As I just said, getting lucky, I think in a lot of ways that work would come to me. I've shared with you the story before. When I first started my consulting business, I didn't do that on purpose. I resigned from my corporate job so my husband and I and my, at the time, 2-year-old could move to Hawaii for an opportunity my husband had. And I resigned from my job. And then the company asked me if I would stay on as a management and strategy consultant. That's how this started. I didn't do this on purpose at all. It was a fate, I think. But nonetheless, when I first started out for those first 2, 3, 4 years, I was very much in that opportunistic mode. I would just wait around until someone would text me or call me or email me and say, hey, do you have a project right now? And I would really, truly hold on to that initial project from my former company, kind of from dear life. I would do anything to make them happy, to keep them so that I had that pillar client and that income coming in. And then I just looked at everything else that came in as sort of gravy, right? Oh, this other project came in. I'll figure out how to fit in both of them just so I can ramp up some revenue. And that was my thought process. I had no thought process around how can I create demand on purpose. That never even crossed my mind that that was a thing. And then eventually over time, I started realizing I didn't want to continue working for my former company. I didn't want to even work for some of my former colleagues that had been calling me to do work for them. Not because I didn't love working with them, but the type of work wasn't that engaging for me. And so I started realizing, wait a second, I could go out and proactively find clients. And even then, it was still very opportunistic. I would have a lot of networking calls and hope that people would bring up the topic of me working with them and some kind of engagement they would have, not wanting to be salesy, overcorrecting for that. It was still very opportunistic. I went on some marketplaces. I talked to some recruiters. I started dipping my toe into posting on LinkedIn. But it was not a point where I had intentionally built out this idea of an owner-led demand generation process. At the point where I got to that and built out a very intentional process, knowing exactly what type of work I wanted to land and reverse engineering everything into that, that's the point at which this really unlocked for me. And again, I didn't have all of those words at the time, but that's what I fell into, just in part by design and in part by accident. And I want to help you accelerate this so that it doesn't take you 4 years or 5 years to figure it out. I want to help you accelerate it so that you can figure out exactly where you're at in this journey and where your gaps might be with respect to having you be the owner of your demand, you being the creator of your demand. So let's help you to avoid the mistakes I made and how long it took me to kind of stumble through this so that you can create the demand that you want in this coming quarter, in this coming year. So let's talk about the misconceptions, and then we'll drill. I think it's important to start with the misconceptions so that then we can set up to help you see where demand really comes from. So the misconceptions are these top five misconceptions. The first is the demand is something that happens to you. The reality is demand is created and managed by the owner as a core business function. When you want a thriving consulting business, you don't think, oh, demand is something that happens to me or some variation of that. You think I can create demand and I manage the demand as the owner. It's a core business function. The second misconception is that activity equals demand. In that story I just shared with you, I was doing a lot of chatting and talking. It felt busy, it felt effective, but I didn't have a pathway in mind. I didn't have an end game in mind. I was honestly just hoping someone else, when I got on the phone with them, would bring up the topic and I wouldn't even have to. Activity doesn't equal demand. The reality is demand isn't about you staying busy. It isn't about you posting on LinkedIn. It isn't about you having conversations. It's about those things, but in a more effective way. It's about you advancing the conversations toward a specific end goal, toward a specific offer that you're wanting to offer to your ideal clients, and having a very clear pathway and journey, prospect to client journey in place for yourself. The third misconception is that your constraint is leads. If you just get more leads, then you'll be able to create demand. And in some ways, that's partially true. But the reality is the real constraint is being able to convert conversations into a clear first step. That was my challenge. I got to the point where I think I had over 100 conversations, but they weren't going anywhere. Eventually, I got lucky and some of them came back. They certainly weren't going anywhere I wanted them to go because I didn't even know where I really wanted them to go. I was just hoping they would go into quote unquote an interesting engagement that would pay me what I wanted to make versus having a very intentional pathway. That's how you start creating demand, the type of demand that you want. The fourth misconception is that you fit in demand generation or lead generation as you can. But when you're fully utilized, you don't need to generate leads or create demand. You don't have space for it anyway, to take on additional engagements. And after listening to this podcast, if you've ever listened to an episode before, that is a complete misconception. Even though you know better, if you're doing this, you're operating off of this misconception that you should prioritize delivery, that your business comes second, that doesn't matter anyway because you don't have an opening for or availability, for a couple of quarters. That's not how a business owner operates, a successful one. A successful business owner operates as those are equal, that you work on delivery and demand generation, and you don't turn it on and off. And then finally, the fifth misconception about creating demand is that success comes from being naturally good at sales. The reality is that success comes from structure, having targets, having an aligned mindset, having a cadence, having an intentional ownership thought process and process. It's not about personality. Listen, if I can become good at business development, you can too. I've shared with you before, I used to be called sales repellent when I was in my corporate job. If I can become good at marketing and sales and lead generation and business development, you can too. Success doesn't come from personality. It doesn't come from you being introverted or extroverted. It comes from you having a structure and this owner-led demand engine I'm about to share with you. So let's tackle those misconceptions so that you can put a process in place to create demand on purpose, to create demand intentionally, to feel in control of your demand and not that it comes to you. So what is this owner-led demand engine I've been talking about? It has 4 components essentially, and I'll tell you what each of these is here in a second. But number 1, it's built around targets. Number 2, You've got a deliberate, repeatable, and valuable way of creating and advancing conversations toward a specific end. You have an end in mind. Stephen Covey, you have an end in mind. Number 3, you run the process even when you're fully utilized. And number 4, it's operated from an owner perspective, not a doer perspective. It's operated from an owner perspective, not a employee perspective. It's operated from an owner perspective and not even a high-performing employee. You're a high-performing employee in your business. That doesn't mean that you're right now good at running the business. We want you to be a high-performing employee and a high-performing owner, both of those. And that's what this owner-led demand engine will do for you. So let's break down each one of those for you. So number 1, you own the targets. There's 5 types of targets that you want to be having in your business, and you set them. You set those targets purposefully. You don't avoid them because it feels bad when you don't hit them. For sure, that's not how you do it. You set these 5 targets. You take responsibility for them. Imagine if you were managing an employee and you told them, this is your target. You need to go do X, Y, or Z. And they came back to you with a bunch of excuses or quote unquote reasons or justifications. You would eventually fire them, right? You take full responsibility for your targets. And the other aspect of you owning your targets is that the targets are based on excess demand, not just enough. So many of us set a revenue goal, let's say one of the targets, right? One of the 5 targets, revenue goal. Let's say your revenue goal is $500,000 this year. And so you think about, well, how do I create enough demand to hit 500K? What does that look like? For you, maybe it's you need to sign 10 50K clients. So that's one client roughly a month for 10 months of the year at 50K, because you offer really nimble, quick to deliver, high impact type of engagements. Your goal is not to go find one client per month. Your goal is to set a target of excess demand where you build a plan and a strategy and a mindset off of landing 15 of those, for example. And if you hit that target, amazing. But you don't build your plan around just enough. Or let's say that you are right now have a pillar client and you have capacity for 1 or 2 more clients during this course of this year. You don't make your plan around, well, just enough, I can land 1 more client. You create a plan around, how do I land 2 or 3 or 4 more clients? So that is focused on excess demand. Now, if you end up landing all of that, phenomenal. Let's figure out what to do with the excess demand. That's not a problem. Or if it is a problem, it's a better problem to have than you falling short of your targets and then not hitting them, right? So that's the first component to this, is that you own your targets. You set the targets, you take full responsibility for them, and the targets are based off of excess demand, not quote unquote just enough, that so many consultants build their plan around just enough, like just exactly what it takes to hit the revenue goal. That's number 1, you own the targets. Number 2, you create conversations on purpose. The second component of this owner-led demand engine and the way you create demand, not wait for demand or hope for demand, is that you're creating conversations on purpose and you're pairing those conversations with a clear first step engagement. So you've got an entire journey built out, back to the end in mind. We know exactly what we want to be selling. I call this a foot in the door offer. How do we back into that? By creating a prospect to client journey, by you creating conversations on purpose, by having a compelling reason that they want to talk to you, one that's valuable, and it doesn't feel salesy to you. So it feels good to you and it's valuable to them. And you've got momentum created in your process. So it goes from that initial conversation all the way through to the foot in the door offer. That's a whole journey. The third component of your owner-led demand engine is that you don't stop. That's pretty simple, right? Simple to say, not always as easy to execute, but you don't stop. You're always running those lead generation processes. Maybe you're in a light mode or a medium mode or a sprint mode. But in one of those modes, you know what mode you're in. and you don't stop. You're always generating demand. And fourthly, you're doing all of this from a revenue owner perspective, from the headspace of a revenue owner, from the mindset of the person who's responsible for revenue, not the doer, not the employee, not even the high performing employee. This is from the headspace of the person who's responsible for revenue. That might sound like at times you want to be in the headspace of the SDR, of the sales development rep. That's the person who's generating leads. At other times, you want to be in the headspace of the sales rep. What do they do when they're advancing a lead into a contract? And other times, you want to be in the headspace of the chief revenue officer who owns all of this process. And ultimately, you want to be in the headspace of a high performing business owner. So knowing which hat you're wearing and how they would think, and then operating whatever you're doing from that headspace versus from the headspace of the doer or the employee, that's the key to running all of those other 3 steps that we talked about. Okay, let me give you an example so you can really bring this to life, what we're talking about here. I'll give you the example of John. John's not his real name, but this is a real person. So let's talk about what he looked like before. So before, in his business, before he put this owner-led demand engine in place, it wasn't called that at the time, but that's what he did. Before, his business mostly relied on recruiters, marketplaces. He had 2 or 3 marketplaces that he leveraged, that he got his foot in the door at a couple of them. And so he started building up some work that would come in, word of mouth, and his warm network, such as, people he had worked with in the past and clients he had worked with in the past. And so it was very much this opportunistic type of a business model where opportunities would come in, and he was getting better at it. He was creating more momentum because he had a lot, he had built up past engagements and client relationships. And so they would come back to him, and he usually talked himself into taking them. Like we all do. Whatever justification, he would make a good one in his mind and feel good about taking on the work most of the time. But he definitely always was feeling on edge because he didn't feel like he had control over this. It felt very elusive. It felt this way of acquiring business felt very hard to grasp onto and feel that he had control over it. And so as he implemented this owner-led demand engine, what he did was, number one, he set those targets that we were talking about, those 5 targets that we talked about, and then he reverse engineered how he would hit them. Instead of feeling worried to set a target or nervous to set the wrong target or not wanting to set a target because he felt like he wouldn't, he would feel bad if he didn't hit it. Instead, he set the revenue target and the other targets that build up to that revenue target, and then figured out exactly how he would hit those. He made himself a hypothesis. And then he developed an intentional prospect to client journey so that he was landing the type of work that he wanted to do at the pricing that supported his revenue goals and that he felt was representative of the value he was bringing to his clients. So specifically, he designed a foot in the door offer, which was a strategy process that he built out for his manufacturing clients, where he would come in and evaluate their current processes. Wasn't his full-blown evaluation, but a high-level evaluation to uncover their key levers that they could work through to make a difference in their cost of manufacturing, in their supply chain issues. So he built this foot in the door offer, and then he made an intentional prospect to client journey all centered around that. So it made it so much easier to get conversations, right? Because people wanted to talk with him about this concept of the diagnostic that he had built. And they made it easier for him to convert audience members when he was speaking into conversations because they wanted to talk about how this diagnostic or the concepts around the diagnostic fit their specific situation. And he stopped thinking about business development as an employee, as the doer, as the person who had to deliver the work. And he bifurcated it for himself. He realized, okay, I'm in this sales mode right now. I'm in this SDR mode right now. I'm in this CRO mode right now. And separated that out from, okay, now I'm going to hand the baton over to the person who's delivering, which was himself. It's only him. He's an independent. But being able to separate those two things in a fun way, in some ways, this can be really fun to think about these different roles you're playing in your business and making sure you know which hat you're wearing at the time. And then ultimately, he was really clear on the activities that he needed to take. So based on his targets, he knew how much every single week he needed to do in order to hit the goals that he had. And he would evaluate and say, at first when he implemented this, he had a goal of talking with 10 people a week. And so he did that for a month, 40 conversations, and realized, okay, that's enough volume, but I need to shift slightly the type of people that I'm talking to. So he made that shift for the next month. Over the period of 3 months until he got to the place of having a very full, robust pipeline and the knowledge and skill set and mindset to keep that going, even when he ramped it down from 10 a week to 2 a week. He was clear on those activities and the volume and did an evaluation process that helped him to improve upon what he was doing and making the most of each conversation. That's John's example. And ultimately, he was able to use this process to hit 50K months, a 500K business. So for you, when you think about shifting from an opportunistic business where you're feeling at the mercy of whatever's coming to you and out of control of the leads that you're generating and the clients that you're creating, into an owner-led demand process, remember that this is about you having constant activity, even during busy periods. Remember that this is about you keeping the engine running, that you are creating demand on purpose and even excess demand so that you can pick and choose from the type of clients that you want to take. That this is you building a process where you're thinking from a different perspective so that you have more control over the process, that you hit your goals. You know what the goals are. You're responsible for the goals. You take responsibility for the goals. You don't accept justifications or excuses or quote unquote reasons why you can't create the demand. And you have control as a result. You have more control over who you're working with, how you're working with them, what pricing you're charging them. You have a faster path from conversation to revenue. When you build out the process I just talked you through with the foot in the door offer, that creates a faster path for you from conversation to revenue. And it creates a lot less pressure on any one opportunity or the dynamic where you have to talk yourself into work because it's coming to you and you don't have control over creating it. That's the way that you put an owner-led demand generation engine in process for your business. That's the way that you create demand instead of waiting for demand. That's the way that you generate demand for yourself instead of hoping demand comes to you. So let's wrap this up with putting the episode into action. By now, as you were hearing me talk about the aspects and components of that demand generation engine, you likely know what's missing in your business. Is it the mindset piece of this? Are you thinking about it from an employee perspective or a doer perspective instead of an owner perspective? Is it the strategy that you don't have in place right now, which is a speed to revenue based, very clear pathway from prospect to client? Is it that you're missing those 5 key targets? Maybe all of them or some of them. Or is it that you keep stopping and starting? Always some consistency, whether it's, small, medium, or large. Which of those is missing for you? Is it all of them? Is it some of them? Go address the gaps so you can set yourself up for a breakthrough year. And if you want help doing this, I'll remind you one last time to join us for the Q1 lead gen sprint. I'll walk you through this step by step. You can definitely do this on your own. But I know for sure, as doing it myself, it took 4 years and a lot of trial and error. You can do this on your own, or you can work with me and a group of other consultants doing the same thing to accelerate this process for yourself, get the feedback, get the coaching, help you to see blind spots, help you to create momentum for yourself, not just, I want to do this. And then week after week goes by and you still haven't done it. And have a specific plan for keeping up the momentum after it's over so that you don't go back to the way that you've been doing business, so that you've got a completely new way of doing this that sticks, that you don't start and stop, that you know for sure you're the type of business owner who will keep this going. That's what the Lead Gen Sprint will help you to accomplish. So you can go over to consultantsprint.com and find all the details, get yourself registered because we start next week. All right, I will see you there. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.